An attempt to build a large Islamic university in Kosovo was underway at that time. Bediüzzaman told both the members of the Committee of Union and Progress and Sultan Reshad, the East, which is like the center of the world of Islam, is in far greater need of such a university. Thereupon, they gave him a pledge that a university will be built in the East. Later, the Balkan War broke out, and the region of that university, that is Kosovo, fell. So, Bediüzzaman applied for the 19,000 gold liras allocated to its construction and successfully directed it to be used for the Eastern University. He once again returned to Van. On the shores of Lake Van at Edremit, he laid the foundations for the construction of the Medrese-tü Zehra. However, the outbreak of the First World War halted these construction efforts for it to never again resume. That winter, Molla Said was already foretelling his students of news. Be prepared, a great calamity and disaster is near us. Bediüzzaman Said Nursi's service to the country and nation as commander of a volunteer regiment. After completing his services at the Caucasian front, which received the acclaim of Enver Pasha and the division commander, he returned back to Van to counter the advancing Russian forces. During the evacuation of Van and the intensifying Russian attacks, he and a few of his students committed to hold out to the end in the citadel of Van. The governor of Van, Cevdet Bey, insisted that they withdrew to the small town of Vastan, while the governor and the provincial police chief withdrew the people to Bitlis. A Cossack cavalry regiment staged an attack on Vastan. Molla Said, together with about 40 men and some students, thwarted the attack by the Cossacks to prevent any persons and possessions from falling into the hands of the enemy. In fact, to bring fear into the Cossack attack, he climbed a mountain at night with his men in attack formation to deceive them into thinking that large reinforcements had arrived and stopped an enemy advancement. He thus saved Vastan from falling to the Russians. During these times of battle, upon returning to the trenches, he would write his tafsir titled İşaretül İcaz, Signs of Miraculousness, with his student Molla Habib as his scribe. Molla Habib would write out his words on horseback, in the line of skirmishes, and in the trenches. A large part of İşaretül İcaz, Signs of Miraculousness, was written in this way. Note: the Qur'anic commentary Signs of Miraculousness, İşaretül İcaz, was written on the front in the first year of the Great War, when no books or sources were available. Apart from the war, there were 4 reasons for its being written extremely concisely. Surah Al-Fatiha and the first half are more concise and succinct. Firstly, the time did not permit elucidation. The old Sayyid expressed what he intended succinctly and briefly. Secondly, he had in mind his students' level of comprehension, and they were highly intelligent. He did not give thought to others understanding it. Thirdly, because he was expounding the miraculousness of the Qur'an's composition, which is of the greatest conciseness and subtlety, the old Sayyid wrote briefly and to the point. But I have reread it now with the new Sayyid's eyes. In truth, notwithstanding all the old Sayyid's faults, with its elevated discussions, this work is a masterpiece. Since when he wrote it, he was in a constant state of readiness to fall in battle, and since his intention was pure, and he wrote it in conformity with the rules of rhetoric and the sciences of Arabic, I now have been unable to refute any part of it. If Allah so wishes, He will accept the work as atonement for the old Sayyid's sins and will raise up people who will understand it completely. If obstacles had not arisen such as the first war, and other fascicles and letters had included other exegetical truths similar to the miraculousness of the Qur'an's composition, one aspect of its miraculousness, which is expounded in this first volume, a fine comprehensive commentary would have been produced on the Qur'an of miraculous exposition. Perhaps in the future, taking this partial commentary and the 66, rather 130 parts of the words and letters as its source, a fortunate committee will write such a commentary, God willing. Said Nursi. Moreover, in Istanbul, Ali Rıza Efendi, who was the chief of the Fetva office, praised the science of miraculousness to many people who would visit him after having studied the tafsir himself. He would announce to them in awe that this Isharatul Ijaz is of the value and strength of 1,000 tafsirs. It has received great acclaim by the scholars of the East and the great scholars in Damascus and Baghdad who have said, the science of miraculousness is an extraordinary tafsir that is unmatched. We include here the complete statements of purpose from the introduction of this extraordinary tafsir in order to provide some background about the work. Statement of purpose. The Qur'an of mighty stature is an all-embracing divine speech and universal dominical address delivered from the sublime throne that addresses all the classes, nations, and members of mankind in every age. So, also, and especially at this time, does it encompass many sciences and branches of learning related to the physical aspects of the world, knowledge of which is beyond the capacity of a single person or small group. Therefore, a commentary issuing from the understanding and imaginative power of one person, the scope of whose comprehension is very narrow with regard to time, place, and spatialization, cannot truly expound the Qur'an, for he cannot be acquainted with and be an expert in all the exact sciences and the branches of knowledge concerned with the spiritual and material states of nations and peoples, all of whom the Qur'an addresses. And he cannot be free of bias towards his own profession and discipline that he might explicate the truths of the Qur'an impartially. Also, a person's understanding is peculiar to him, and he may not call on others to accept it unless it is affirmed by a consensus of some sort. And his findings and judgments related to actions are binding only on himself and no one else, again unless approved by a consensus. In consequence of this, a commentary should be written after minute studies and researches by an elevated committee of authoritative scholars, each of whom is a specialist in a number of sciences, proving the Qur'an's subtle meanings and its fine points to be found scattered through other commentaries, and its truths, which become manifest in time due to the discoveries of science. Just as its legal ordinances have to be ordered and regulated, not according to the thought of a single person, but by such a committee after being scrutinized and studied minutely by it. Thus, gaining the trust and confidence of the mass of the people, the committee will implicitly assume responsibility for them and be an authoritative source for the Muslim community. Indeed, one who expounds the Qur'an should possess high intelligence, penetrating independent judgment, and a high degree of sanctity. But in these times, in particular, such conditions can be met only by the brilliant collective personality born of the cooperation of an elevated, esteemed committee and the uniting of the minds of its members, of their assistance for one another and harmony of spirit, and of their freedom of thought, and being free of bias, of their complete sincerity. Only a collective personality such as this can expound the Qur'an. For, in accordance with the rule, what is not found in the parts is present in the whole. These qualities, which are not to be found in any one person, are present in the group. While awaiting, as I had for many years, the appearance of such a comedy, I had a premonition that we were on the eve of a terrible earthquake that would lay waste the country. Note: yes, our master said while teaching us on the roof of the Hor Madrasa in one that there was going to be a terrible earthquake, and exactly as he predicted, a short time later the Great War broke out. His students of the time, Hamza, Mehmet Shefik, Mehmet Mihri. And so, in accordance with the rule, it is not permissible to abandon a thing completely even if it is not wholly obtained. Despite my impotence, faults, and difficult style of writing, I started to set down on my own some of the Qur'an's truths and some indications of the miraculous inimitability of its composition. Then, on the Great War breaking out, I found myself in the mountains and valleys of Erzurum and Pasinler. Whenever the opportunity arose while I was performing the duty of jihad in the midst of those tumultuous conditions, I used to write what occurred to my heart in phrases that did not always match one another. Since it was not possible to have any books or commentaries to refer to, what I wrote consisted only of what occurred to my heart. If these inspirations of mine are appropriate for a commentary, light of lights, if they contain contradictory aspects, this can be referred to my own defects. Certainly, there are places in need of correction, but since it was written with complete sincerity in the front lines of war among the slain, like it is not permissible to change the clothes and wash off blood of martyrs, I could not permit the ripped phrases in which it was clothed to be changed. My heart would not consent to it. And now it does not consent to it, for now at this time I cannot find that utter sincerity and purity of heart. Furthermore, I did not write this work of mine, called Science of Miraculousness, with the intention of its being a true commentary, only in the event of its being well received. I wrote it as a model and source for a commentary to be written in the future that treated a few aspects of Qur'anic exegesis. Mullah Habib, who for Bediüzzaman was as valuable as 20 students, and was the scribe of the tafsir, Isharatul Ijaz, was martyred in that battle in Wastan after conveying critical intelligence about enemy movements to Halil Pasha, the commander at the Iranian front. During those skirmishes, the Armenian soldiers were murdering children in some places. Sometimes Armenian children would also be killed in retaliation. One time, thousands of Armenian children had been gathered together in the sub-district where Bediüzzaman was. Mullah Said ordered his soldiers, "Do not touch any one of them." He later released these women and children, and they returned to their families who were amongst the Russians. The Armenians really admired this example of Muslim morality, and from then on, whenever the Russians occupied other areas, the head of the Armenian militia refrained from slaughtering Muslim children. They swore that, since Mullah Said stopped such killings and returned our children to us, we will stop the killing of Muslim children as well. Mullah Said had thus ensured that thousands of innocent lives were saved. After taking Van and Mush, the Russians moved with 3 divisions to attack Bitlis. The governor of Bitlis, Memduh Bey, and Kelali told Bediüzzaman, "We have remaining a battalion of soldiers and about 2,000 of your militiamen. We have no choice but to withdraw." Bediüzzaman said to them, "The inhabitants who are still evacuating from the surrounding areas, the women and children of Bitlis, and their possessions will be taken by the enemy. Even if it means we fall behind, we must ward off the enemy for at least 4 or 5 days until all the people have moved on to safety." They replied by suggesting, "With the fall of Mush, There are soldiers who are trying to capture 30 large guns of the Russians. If we can capture those 30 large guns, we can hold off the enemy so the people can make it. Bediüzzaman, I will either die or capture those guns and bring them here. With 300 of his militia men, he traveled to Nursi to capture these large guns. The informers delivered the following exaggerating news to the Russian Cossack regiment. A commander of a voluntary regiment of 3,000 men defending Bitlis has been joined by the famous Musa Bey and 1,000 of his men from the mountains. They are coming to capture the guns. The Cossack commander had no choice but to retreat in fear. Bediüzzaman, together with his 300-strong militia, moved all the Gansti and countered back to Bitlis. Bediüzzaman personally advanced until the farthest point and captured the final remaining gun with 3 of his men. This was the way he ensured that 30 large guns were brought back to Bitlis. For 4 days, the soldiers of the army, together with the voluntary militiamen, held back enemy attacks and ensured that the lives and possessions of the people were protected. In order to instill bravery into his soldiers, Bediüzzaman would not enter the trenches and would remain in the firing line. One time, while advanced in the line of fire on horseback, bothering his spirit was the following thought, which has suddenly, if I was to become a shaheed, martyr, right now, I wonder if my ikhlas, which is the essence of the level of shahada, martyrdom, would be spoiled. I wonder if it would be boastful this way. He immediately turned his horse back and went along with his men. Note his thinking at the most intense periods of battle, in which the question of life and death gloomed more than ever was. I wonder if this apparently heroic behavior goes against true ikhlas. This was a noteworthy demonstration of the perfection of his qualities. While fulfilling an essential part of his heroic role to instill bravery into his men in the front line of battle between enemy gunfire, and riding his horse advanced ahead, he was carrying out the duties of courage of Iman and representing the glory of Islam in the best way as a commander. At such a time, to consider and pay attention to the significance of the mystery of Ikhlas, which is the most exalted and purest level of perfection found in his spirit and intention, is an indication to the level of perfection in his spirit far more than the praiseworthy, self-sacrificing struggle he displayed in his service to religion. Thus, through the testimony of his life, the titles of Bediüzzaman, Sahibü'z-Zaman, Fahrü'd-Devaran, Fatunul Asr, which Molla Said was renowned with, never consisted of untrustful words. The enormous service of Iman and Qur'an he performed with the Risale-i Nur and the sacred collective spiritual character which he initiated with the millions of self-sacrificing students are a truthful witness and most decisive proof of this. Although he was hit by 4 bullets while advanced in the firing line, he did not even retreat into the trenches to avoid disheartening his voluntary soldiers. Upon hearing this, the governor Memduh Bey and General Kelali sent the orders for him to retreat. Bediüzzaman's reply was, "This enemy shelling will not kill me." And it was true that, although being hit by 3 bullets, one of them hit his dagger and the other went through his tobacco case and did not kill him. In the evening, after the governor and general had evacuated the people and the soldiers and militia had left, Bediüzzaman stayed behind with a small number of his brave students. They made the decision to save some of the remaining helpless people and stay on guard for them. The following morning, they found themselves engaged in a fierce skirmish with a battalion of enemy soldiers. Many of them become martyred. At this point, Ubayd, who was Bediüzzaman's nephew and brave student, was martyred in place of him. Then, in extraordinary fashion, Bediüzzaman broke through 3 enemy lines with 3 of his students and hid in a conduit with the snowy water running by. Wounded and with a broken leg, he remained in water and mud for 33 hours. The terrible situation they found themselves with their rifles in hand and enemy sounds coming from the building next to the conduit was quelled by the peace of heart and happiness they had for the evacuation of all the inhabitants. In consoling his friends, Bediüzzaman told them, "We will use our rifles only when a group of enemy soldiers arrive. We will not give ourselves up that easily. We will not use bullets for 1 or 2 enemies." It is a subtle divine favor that, although they were able to see the Russian soldiers above them and the Russians were active on search to find them, they were not found for 33 hours. Bediüzzaman turned to his militiamen, who were also his students, and told them, "Friends, do not stay here. Leave. I have forgiven you from now. Leave me here and try to save yourselves." But those sacrificing and heroic students replied with loyalty, "We will never leave you here in this state. If we are to be martyred, let it be while serving you." They were later captured by the Russians, who then transferred them to 1 Tiflis, Kilogrif, and then Kostroma. The Armenian militia were famous for their loyalty. In fact, it is narrated that they would never disclose a secret even if their eyes and faces were kept over burning coal. And at that time, the Russians used to say that Bediüzzaman and his volunteer militia force are far superior to the Armenian militiamen. This is the reason why they have been so successful in defeating our Cossack forces. Bediüzzaman was taken to the prisoner of war camp. Here, a truly astonishing event took place. One day, the Russian commander-in-chief of the Caucasian front came to inspect the prisoners in the camp. While walking past for his inspection, the general realized that Bediüzzaman was paying him no attention and was not standing up. Angered by this, the general walked by him once more, thinking that he did not notice. Mullah Said remained seated on the ground. "I don't think he recognizes who I am." Bediüzzaman, "I do. You are Nikola Nikolayevich." "General, this is a direct insult to the Russian army and the Tsar." Bediüzzaman, "I did not insult you. I am a Muslim scholar. Somebody with belief in Almighty Allah is superior to a person without belief. Therefore, I will not stand before you." After this exchange, Bediüzzaman is taken away to be court-martialed. Some of his prisoner friends who were officers came to persuade him to apologize to the general and avoid the matter escalating to an execution. But with great dignity and bravery, Bediüzzaman told them, "For me, the execution sentence is like my passport for the eternal realm." The decision to execute him was given, and as preparations were underway to carry out the sentence, Bediüzzaman requested some time to perform his religious duty of Salat before facing the firing squad. It was right at this moment, while he was completing his Salat, that the Russian general came forward to approach Bediüzzaman in apology. "I request that you forgive me. I have realized that your action was in loyalty to the sacredness of your religion. Forgive me. I apologize." The sentence against him was lifted. Bediüzzaman remained as a prisoner of war near Siberia for about 2.5 years. For the sake of Allah, He spent all his life reviving the Qur'an, Islam, and the Sunnah. The self-sacrificing hero of Islam did not cease his efforts here either. He worked to enlighten and give guidance to the people around him and started giving lessons to the prisoners. On one occasion, a Russian general saw that he was giving lessons to 90 of his officer friends. Supposing it to be a political speech, he ordered for it to stop. However, after finding out that the talks were delivering lessons of a religious, scholarly, and social nature, he allowed it to resume. Ultimately, Bediüzzaman found a way to escape captivity and successfully traveled to St. Petersburg and Warsaw. Then, in the year 1918, he traveled by way of Vienna to Istanbul. Bediüzzaman Said Nursi, who was commanding a voluntary militia force, retells his days in captivity in one of his works as follows. Note: many years later, Bediüzzaman was sent to Barla, where he was treated like a captive. It was here where he wrote the 13th hub of the 26th flash, describing his captivity in Kostroma. Anyone interested can refer to that Risale.